Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the day 2 of Innovation and Development Summit. We are here to discuss the topic we have named Urban Green. First, I would like to introduce the panelists. But before doing that, I would like to set up the premise for what Urban Green stands for in our minds so that we can engage and hopefully have a fruitful discussion on it. Why did we choose the term urban green as the topic? We chose it both for metaphoric and literal meanings of what urban green stands for. Urban green stands for climate change and sustainability. Those are very important issues that stand before us in the current climate. Urban Greens also stands for something that is very topical and something we all need to reflect on. The cities, and one of the major roles of cities is being the manufacturing distribution centers of agricultural produce. Cities that in a way control food. And why I'm saying food is because of the 1950s agenda of development, shifting from the 50s agenda of Roti Kapda or Makan to now very much towards food, water, and energy. And this shifting of agenda really, boils down to these three main ingredients of what actually impacts the city life as well. The third aspect of urban green refers to the green spaces, the open spaces that a city has, and whether we can still be looking at open spaces and the green spaces as something separate from development. Whether they are, they should be included in the development plan. These are not spaces that are just left out of development or, just as open spaces, but these are spaces that have incredible social value. These are spaces that are hangout spaces for a city. And as everybody knows, hangout spaces in a city has huge social value. This is where new ideas are formed. This is where communities engage with each other. This is where, new thought processes happen. And so it's both literal and metaphoric that we refer to when we talk about urban greens. Of course, we will also discuss the idea of rapid urbanization and, the rapidity of it is very alarming and almost a given value. We almost assume that, urbanization has this rapid speed under which we are all getting, bulldozed and we have no choice but to keep catching up with it. What is the hurry, we might ask, of urbanization? And as this is much used quote by Gandhi, Gandhiji saying, speed is immaterial if you're on the wrong road. And so do we need to check whether we are on the right road as far as the rapidity of urbanization is concerned? The second thing we might want to sort of look at is, currently collapsing typologies. We have seen how homes have become offices as well. Offices also have softened their edges to accommodate longer hours and therefore, providing a more comfortable atmosphere for its workers. Health sector is joining hands with hospitality sector so that, the five-star hospitals look like five-star hotels now with a lobby and a restaurant and a library and the rooms looking all, very plush. So the idea of luxury, hospitality and hospitals are collapsing. And so in various sectors, we find that, the traditional typologies are no longer sacrosanct. And there are intersections between typologies that that of course demand a new, relook at architectural spaces, but also architectural usage, and whether the city can work as a differently to accommodate the daily use, and then for a night use you have something else. So that there's a major shift going on there, and of course the third thing is how our cities are going to respond to to climate change, and accommodate sustainability not just as a term, but consume less. How do we kind of make our ways in a way that we consume less material, less hoard less, and that is a growing trend in the younger generation as well. That their consumption level is, I think, maybe it's a provocation, but I think far less than what we were consuming in our youth, probably. So these are the broad points that we might want to reflect on, discuss. But also, I would now introduce our eminent panelists. And while I introduce them, if they could also reflect on the ground I've set. And also I would like, if the panelists would like to ask each other questions, so that my role as a moderator, hoping that I will have to moderate and keep you away from each other, comes to life, and or that would be good if we can achieve it. It doesn't matter if we can't. So let me just introduce Professor Habib Khan, who's a very eminent person, architect, graduated in architecture from VNIT, formerly VRCE, and went to USA, where he completed his master's in architectural design from University of Illinois. After his master's degree, he worked in Philadelphia, coordinating major retail design projects for retail giants across the world. He returned to India in 1990 and started his own private practice. He was awarded the JIIA Best Interior Design Award by the Indian Institute of Architects in 1998 and ICAF Young Architects Award in 2000. Professor Khan was also awarded the Orange City Achievement Award in 2009 and State Level Excellence in Architecture and Education Award by the IIA Maharashtra chapter in 2011. Recently, he and Smita, his partner, were awarded the prestigious INBA Award 2018 for large-scale promotion of traditional and vernacular architecture around the world. Architect Habib Khan is also involved in teaching since the beginning of his career. He is currently the director at Priyadarshini Institute of Architecture and Design Studies, PIADS, Nagpur, and Lokmanya Tilak Institute of Architecture and Design Studies, Mumbai. His design teaching revolves around sensitizing students towards their own heritage and roots, context and climate within the framework of being contemporary. Professor Khan has actively been working with the government of Maharashtra on policy framing guidelines. He's also been nominated by the government of Maharashtra on the Council of Architecture. He's currently the president of Council of Architecture. Welcome, Professor Khan.
Thank you.
Mr. V. Suresh, Vasudevan Suresh, is a civil engineer from Anna University, College of Engineering, Chennai, with experience of over 56 years in housing, urban and rural development, infrastructure and real estate sectors with sustainable development. He was former CMD HUTCO with all-round growth in housing, innovative infrastructure development, use of appropriate technology applications for the resilient built environment. He's a member of expert group for EIA Infra projects of Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change and member of Advisory Council for Rebuild Kerala. He's the chairman of CII, Indian Green Buildings Council, IGBC, president of Focus, chairman of BIS Housing Committee, vice chairman of National Building Code of India, and member of BIS Smart Cities Committee. He has received 17 awards, and to cap it with the CIDC Industry Doyen Award 2011, IBC Lifetime Achievement Award 2014, CIA World Lifetime Achievement Award 2017, and ACCE Gaurav Award 2020. He is President, Good Governance India Foundation for Good Urban Governance Initiatives for meeting the challenges of urbanization and making smart, green, sustainable, and vibrant cities through work on Municipalika and CapEx. Very warm welcome to you, Mr. Suresh. Dr. Vatsal Bhatt consults with US Green Building Council as the President for Communities, and where he helped conceptualize and make operational the lead for cities and lead for communities rating systems. He co-leads the application frameworks working group on the National Institute for Standards and Technology-led efforts for developing IoT-enabled smart cities frameworks, and serves on the US Technical Advisory Group for the ISO's Technical Committee 268 for Sustainable Cities. He recently peer-reviewed the Future of Housing Roadmap for XPRIZE. He's also serving on the Board of Advisors for the Wellbeing City Award mobilized by the New Cities Foundation. As a senior policy analyst at the Brookhaven National Laboratory, Dr. Bhatt has worked on various national and international assignments for energy systems analysis and low carbon development for the US Department of Energy, the US Department of State, the US Environmental Protection Agency, the National Science Foundation, universities, foundations, and international governments. He has developed energy, water, climate change systems modeling for long-term national, regional, and urban analysis. Dr. Bhatt is a senior advisor to the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority for New York State's 100% renewables study and EPRI project on NYS electric system climate resiliency. Dr. Bhatt is a lead author of the US Global Change Research Program's first ever assessment of the effects of climate change on energy production and use in the United States, Synthesis and Assessment Product 4.5. Very warm welcome to you, Dr. Bhatt. So you can see while I was introducing our eminent panelists that you could get no better people in India who were absolutely linked to the question of urbanity and to the question of greenness, if I may call it that. So if I can start with Mr. V. Suresh first, and could you tell us about the issue that we raised, and I think it was also prompted by you, where you have thought about the rapidity of urbanization. What does it mean? What does rapid urbanization mean? And what does it do to the diversity of a city? Who gets ahead in this race and who gets left behind? And what are the new ideas on development that in this rapidity are the winners and who are the losers? Could you throw some light on those very controversial points?
Surely. Am I audible?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Good. Very happy. Good afternoon to all the distinguished panelists, my colleagues, Professor Habib Khan and Vatsal Bhatt, and to you, Vibhuti, and all the participants for this program. First of all, let me congratulate you for selecting a very interesting theme and a very timely theme on which you have taken, primarily in the context of the climate change dialogue that's going on and the efforts to ensure that we do not get into the 2-degree centigrade rise in temperature, and what are efforts we need to do to contain that, and therefore keeping that in view, what can cities do at the very micro level and the macro level are the most important concerns which everybody is. We got just 10 more years to go to the Sustainable Development Goal to the year 2030, and 5 years already over. Many are working on the 17 goals which are available under the initiative for the sustainability movement for the built environment. And in India's context, also equally important for you to see is you just take 2001, 2011, and you take you not reach 2021 complete, but more or less they come to end of 2020. We got one of the biggest demographic explosion anywhere in the world taking place of adding exactly 400 million people in 20 years time period. 400 million people getting added from 100 crores at 2000, and by 2021 will be 140 crores. If you see even the census figure, it was 101 crores in 2001. 2011 census was 121 crores. So we added about 20 crores in the 10-year period, adding at the rate of 2 crores or 20 million each year. Nowhere in the world you could see this biggest demographic explosion taking place of adding. And we were just around 32 crores at the time of independence. And that took 5,000 years of India, 3000 BC and 2000 AD to become 32 crores. And in 20 years time period, we are going to add 40 odd crores getting added, or 400 million. But it's not just the population alone getting added that worries me. Not worries me, it concerns everybody, because there's a lot of demographic dividend. Otherwise, using that particular thing as a positive also are the issue that there's also a major shift from rural to urban. If you have 16% urbanization at the time of independence, came to around 28% by 2001, but we could see a major shift taking place of and more than 50% of all the new population I was talking about are all in urban areas. Even the 20 crores getting added, 10.8 crores were in the urban, and only 9.2 crores were taking place in the rural area. So that means we are increasing towards urbanization. We are nowhere near the developed countries' large percentage of urbanization values of 70, 80%, etc. But we are very closely coming towards the 40% level. So from 28% to 33% by 2011, we are about now around 38% now, will be 40% very shortly. And so that urban population is going to double from 28 crores in 2001 to as much as around 56 crores very, very shortly. And that's a very large number. We ourselves are going to be around 600 million urban population by 2030. 2030 is a very important watershed year for all of us, for the whole world is watching that as a year by which we'll all be able to achieve what we need to be achieved in terms of the climate change parameters, and what each country should do to see that the negative effects of the environment is mitigated in the best possible way. And 600 million is a very big number. Now imagine 28 crores, which is just about less than 20 years back, and cities are a major growth engine. I want you to understand that. They are the biggest growth engine because more than 75% of India's GDP is contributed by city-based economies. So that means it is the agricultural economy or the agrarian economy still contributes only about 22% of our GDP. So therefore, there is a major reason why the shift from the rural to urban component is coming. It is not the rural population is getting lesser. Only thing is, they're also adding in this big number game, but their percentage has come down. Instead of 84% in 1947, it came to around 72% in 2001, and maybe it will be 60% by very shortly by mid 2025, around that particular period over there. So therefore, there's a major area where the urban economies are very important. Manufacturing industry, you rightly brought out, Vibhuti, and therefore service sector will add on, tertiary sector will get added on in this particular area. So job creation of a various nature, and this also has come in the number of cities getting added over there to 7,313 in the whole country, as against about 6.4 lakhs villages in different parts of the country there. So urbanization is a very major component, and it is a movement that cannot be shifted back, turned back. But what you require is a balanced type of growth coming instead of all being in the big mega cities over 10 million or 100 crore, 100 lakh plus population, and not in the 50 lakhs plus population or 5 million plus. Get it into 1 million plus more and more. and get it also into 1 lakh to 10 lakhs population. Take those small towns, all the municipal corporation towns of around 170 that we have. Also get into the tier 2 and tier 3 cities growth. If you're able to do that, then you'll have a balanced urbanization. It's a concentrated one only in the big cities coming. Now, some city states have done well in that. Maharashtra is a good example. So also is Tamil Nadu. They all already crossed. All of them already crossed more than the 50% urbanization level. Therefore, you have to understand that the urbanization is reasonably balanced in a large number of towns which are also catching up, like Coimbatore, Salem, Madurai, Chennai, like Kolhapur, Sholapur, you have Pune, Nagpur, Nashik, etc., also growing equally well, and it's very well. So that's the type of things I was wondering. Gujarat is very closely following that. So you have a great necessity coming from the point of view of the urbanization there. And one disturbing factor is that still, in spite of the fact that they contribute to about over 70% of the GDP, they occupy the urban spaces, which are the growth engines, still occupy only between 4 to 6% of the total landmass of the country. Can you believe such a major economic activity taking place in all the cities and towns? It was earlier, Charles Correa Commission report had indicated about 3.5%. And that is early 90s there. It's come to around 4.5% later. As I use about 4 to 6%. So therefore, depending upon the nature of states, this figure will still be at a lower level. Some of those states which are urbanizing very well, like as I said, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, where the urbanization is increasing, there the percentage of urban areas vis-a-vis the rural area is increasing at 6%. If you want to deal with the doubling of the urban population, which is 28 crores to about 56 crores, you cannot deal with the same 4% level. So you got to increase the urban land footprint a little more. Otherwise, you have to keep on going vertical. And that's got its own disaster, or go horizontal, or a mix of both those things together. So you got to also think in terms of the new urban land mass to be created either around the cities, or new town development, or development of the wonderful initiative of the 500 Amrut cities or 1 lakh population, plus their start inputs on those things. Then they will be able to absorb large amount of those particular population increase, or the 100 smart cities program, or also all those things on the freight corridors that we have. In various freight corridors have been identified there, the new township development linked with economic development to be done. So therefore, the need for the spread is equally important, so you don't get the concentration effort that happens, which creates into high density type of development, which has already started taking place in the big megacities of India. We have only about 3 big megacities, which are Delhi, Calcutta, and Mumbai. The others will very shortly join that. Chennai will join. Bangalore very, very shortly they will join into that 10 million plus population level. And Hyderabad is a little closer on that. So we got to really concentrate on these aspects in a big way. But I think the larger issue that we should address with respect to your particular thing on urban green is how good are we from the point of view of the climate change component and related issues, on how are we addressing that? I would feel that if we have say 1 tree for 5%, five people in Mumbai, the same situation is 5 trees for 1 person in New York. Now there are various other states. If you have roughly of the order of around 8 to 10 square meter per person of green available in most of the developing countries, you are in many developed countries, it can go as much as 80 to 100 square meter per person of the green cover available for those cities over there, getting into as much as 30 to 40%, etc. I'm sure all of us look up to good models over there. Singapore is always a very good model. Do you know, Vibhuti, it's now called no more new gardens coming in a city over there. It's called the city within a garden. That means the whole city has come within a garden where the green space has increased from around 37% 20 years back, and today is about 47% is the green space that we have in the in Singapore. Of course, you might have one Hyde Park with around 600 acres development, or a Central Park in New York with 700 acres of development coming, and such sporadic developments do come in big cities there. Delhi is also equally good. We also have the Tagore Parks, as well as Buddha Jayanti Park, Nehru Park. So many good effort, reasonably good effort has come, but still falling much, much shorter. Still an average of only around 22 square meter per person is the type of greening coming on there. So you also have to look at greening as an important issue to bring down, to contribute to the climate change issue, to bring down the temperature rise coming, and how the green can help in bringing out the urban, very important issue of the heat island effect that will come when you bring with urbanization, with the buildings that come emanating substantial heat there, how the green component that can be added either horizontally at the ground level, or a vertical green or a roof green, various other aspects are there. How do you deal with that in terms of trees and avenues and plantations, plus the other green effect, etc., is an important component. So we got to work on all these areas. If we accepting for a certain concentrated effort in Chandigarh and Gandhinagar, wherein the percentage of space per person and for the greening, the contribution is substantially larger there. But even there, in terms of the maintenance, other related issues, not the same. It's not only space that's required, you could also maintain them as green continuously. Not in 1 year or 2 year, but continuously over decades, how that particular green has got to be sustained. And this is an area where a lot of sustainable elements come in over there of the water use, and all the water that's coming in all your cities over there, recycle those particular water through primary, secondary, and tertiary treatment, use the recycled water for landscaping and gardening, and whichever be the success story anywhere in the world, they are done this because all the sewage and sullage has been recycled, and the recycled water has been utilized. What are the problem area? You converted that into an asset, and then the greening also started blooming up into a very large way. We have not done that. Not a single city in India has got a recycling plant at the
Yes, so I think that is a very interesting pointer, that rather than look at development in terms of the rural areas getting urbanized, we look at these urban bubbles which are sustainable, and they recycle they grow their own food, they produce their own energy, because the current models of urbanization are pretty disappointing, that we read in the papers every day. They're full of pollution, full of rubbish, full of traffic chaos. So there is no good news about urbanization we see, yet we are following the race, and we try to kind of speed it up, because if the population is growing and it's getting out of hand, and so we have to build, so there is a kind of a frenzy always attached to how there are too many people.
Add one sentence. The answer to all that particular thing is that we should get into sustainable development of the green built environment development. I did not talk one line of that, because the answer lies in that, because I thought initially you want to know what the problem area, how to change that, what are things. So you got to have a very major concerted efforts for going towards not green building alone, green built environment. That is buildings along with the environment at the level of a neighborhood level, a campus level, or a township level, or even a city level. We got to take that from the micro to macro level in a large way. That will be one major way to address this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that is could be a way forward, rather than just label it as urbanization, which obviously doesn't seem to produce any results. And also, I mean, one could also look at ruralization of the cities that's happening. All the rural wisdom coming into the cities, and organic food, and all the kind of the slow pace life that people are sort of indulging in. So there is a sort of a coming together of these two modes, which of course, again, I would like to ask Professor Khan as to what is happening with the traditional development patterns of working with land use, commercial, residential is separate, the kind of Le Corbusian modernism that demanded these separations, and in order to have a neat development, and to things that are now neither mixed use nor separate. What do you think is happening for to bylaws to, so generally broadly speaking about practice as to, what are the new things that is happening, because everything seems to be shifting in terms of these pockets that were created, very neat pockets that were created by modernism are kind of seem to be collapsing.
First of all, thank you, Vibhuti, for inviting me to this very interesting and very relevant discussion on urbanity, urbanism, and urban greens. Uh, B. Suresh and Vishal Bhatt, I am honored to be amongst you to discuss this issue. I almost kind of agreed with what Suresh ji just said and what Vibhuti you just said. Before answering your question, answering your point, I would like all of you to look at this from a larger perspective. A larger perspective wherein we really investigate whether do we need the kind of growth pattern that we are having at the moment. Should we continue with the same pattern of growth and the development of our cities, or should we learn from the mistakes that we've done earlier or mistakes that are happening elsewhere in the world and in our country? We need to tackle this issue at a macro level and a micro level. And when it comes to the macro level, some of the points have been already raised by Suresh ji and you. We need to think where our cities are going, and the issue of intense urbanization that is happening in our country, specifically in concentrated circles, in metros, or tier two cities. The intensity varies, but the urban migration keeps continuing. We need to look at a larger perspective wherein we need to empower the rural sector, wherein we are able to provide the quality of life and the economic empowerment that is needed in the rural sector, and we stop the migration from the rural sector to the urban cities. Because what is happening is the urban infrastructure is getting so overworked. The government keeps providing, city fathers will keep providing, and we have not learned from the mistakes that have happened in the Western world or elsewhere in the world, wherein the infrastructure crumbles down, it falls apart. Whatever you do, however amount of money you pump into the urban system, it will always fall short because we are not attacking the problem at its root. We need to attack the issues at its basic fundamental level, wherein we are not creating problems, but we're trying to give solutions to the problems. We're creating problems and then giving solutions, which I think is a faulty way of looking at the entire scenario. And unless we architects, urban designers, urbanists, policymakers concentrate on this fundamental issue of looking at the rural infrastructure, rural empowerment, this issue will never be solved. We'll keep discussing these issues in forums like this, in platforms like this, amongst our fraternity, and which I feel sometimes are rarely heard by the politicians, by the policymakers, or we feel good. It's a feel good factor for all of us, but actually, honestly, it doesn't work. We feel empowered that we have discussed this, but actually nothing happens. And 20 years down the line, 30 years down the line, we still will keep discussing. The next generation will keep discussing, but the problems are never resolved. So we need to look at this issue. We will discuss this maybe in a little more detail if time permits. The second issue is the pattern of growth that we are all looking at. The pandemic has shown us has not broken the world, but has shown a broken world to us, our own broken world to us, and we need to seriously introspect and think how we've been growing, how we've been developing. I think it is time to talk of degrowth. Degrowth does not mean that you cast aside or put aside all patterns of development, but it is basically stepping out of the race and looking at the concept of the GDPs, of all the percentages of the economic growth, of the urban growth, of population densities, infrastructure, infusion of money, and everything. We need to relook at the entire pattern of growth that we have been following up till now in this world, and time to degrow and think and introspect as to what should be the new roadmap of our urban development. or the entire economic development pattern of the model that we've been following. Few days, few months of lockdown has crumpled the economy of trillions of dollars. It just needed a small invisible virus to do that. Yet we are not learning from the entire thing. We are running after vaccination. We are running after the same old mistakes that we wanted to commit. We committed and we again want to commit. We need to really look at this from a fresher perspective which is more grounded and and look at a growth pattern of our cities in a totally different way. Maybe cocoon cities, maybe isolated cities. Maybe we decide, the size of a city, and after it reaches a certain population, we make a satellite city or make a new city. We have cities people have talked about it, the Broadacre city, the Green Cities, and so on and on. Patrick Geddes, Frank Lloyd Wright. So many people have talked about, many urban planners have talked about it before, but only talked about, but never implemented. We need to have our own self-contained cocoons or bubbles, and that bubble should never be burst. And we move to a new bubble and develop that bubble, and we have decentralized growth of cities. I'm just throwing ideas which probably need discussion. But when it comes to the micro level, you're talking of the urban greens. We need to do something about the quality of life of our urban citizens, wherein we are looking at improving the quality of life by providing more green cover, more green areas, more recreational areas, interactive areas, civic areas, and so on and on. And that's where probably the concentration need to be. That first we contain the urban migration. Secondly, we improve the quality of life of the urban citizens. Now, coming to what Vibhuti you just asked was the bylaws and the traditional bylaws. Let us put this in again a larger perspective, wherein let us look at the way our cities were traditionally, how organically they grew, and what was the growth pattern, what was the interactive pattern, what was the cultural milieu of the whole growth of a city. And Corbusian example or any modern city example to me is very clinical, where you divide the city into sectors, you divide the city horizontally, vertically, whatever way, whatever the thought process may be, and try to sanitize the cities, which was not our traditional growth pattern, which was not the organic growth pattern that our cities and towns had earlier. And when coming to bylaws, I mean, I'll just give you an example wherein we have a plot of land which is governed, the size of which is governed by various economic means. You have a 3,000 square feet, or 5,000, or 10,000 square feet plot. Who has decided this? What makes you decide the size of a plot wherein you can't really fulfill your requirement? And as your aspirations in those very size of the plots that you've been given, and who has decided the value of that plot, the economic value of the plot? This is all humbug, and this is all thrust upon you. Number one, and number two, then you have to leave margins, front margins, side margins. I'm just giving you one example. Our traditional cities never had this. Our traditional houses looked inside. They sprung from inside to outside, and it's a long discussion, but we are basically adopting across the country a Western model which is not suited to our development of the city, development of the bylaws, development of we as human beings. It has systematically destroyed the culture that we all had, the traditions that we all had. And I hope in a utopian model that I am dreaming of, we will have a more sustained traditional value-based systems in our city development. I'm open to discussion, and I'll just keep it short and then listen to Vishal and then carry it forward.
Yes, sure. Thank you. So I will come back to the dream development in the last round. So we give you time to kind of formalize the dream. Dr. Vatsal, you've worked very closely with communities, and you straddle both worlds of the so-called West and the so-called India. I mean, I'm saying the so-called India because all of us have a different India in our heads, and all of us have a different West in our heads. But still there are the seemingly two worlds. And you in both these worlds you've known community intimately, and you've worked with communities, with them being the stakeholder in whatever your intervention projects have been. Tell me what are the key differences you find in the communities in these two worlds, and what are the similarities and differences in how you approach and how they approach you?
So I will add one more element to it. I have worked for last 20 years on elements with India, United States, as well as China. So that is the third element I'm adding. I think, very simply speaking, whether we talk about any of these nations or the way in which they work, I think it's similar in nutshell because people are similar. People have similar aspirations, whichever world we talk about. So I think that is the fundamental issue we are dealing with, people's aspirations. And people's aspirations are different in different worlds. And I think, again, the development patterns differ based on those aspirations. So I think ultimately, as Professor Khan was saying, our interest is to improve quality of life. So which way we talk about is important, and aspirations that we deal with is important. So I think point here is that, as Professor Khan was saying, there are some archaic rules, archaic regulations in our cities that we need to change because we are in now 21st century and we are still dealing with the 18th century, so-called 18th century regulations that we need to think about. At the same time, the way you talked about community, so we believe that community participation needs to be there because what we talk about in today's world is equity, social equity, economic equity, access to infrastructure, access to resources. I think Pooja Dua asked us a question on Facebook on the same thing, talking about demand supply gap. And that demand supply gap, whether we talk about natural resources or any other resources that we are talking about in an urban setting or even rural setting, is very big discussion here. And I think we need to really tackle that. So as a community, we need to ask them, what are we looking for? What are we looking for in today's world? What are we looking for in tomorrow's world? I just came back from India. I was there for a month and a half, attending to my parents' COVID situation. But point here is that I always see that we aspire. So as Professor Khan was saying, we are bringing those Western ideas here. I think it's just aspiration. Professor Satdev, as you know, working with your university students this semester, we are doing a studio for Gurgaon. And we all know Gurgaon's development and, high-rise buildings there and the urban heat island that Mr. Suresh mentioned a few minutes ago are critical issues. So it is us as people. And I think that is what we need to tackle. I see today, most of my friends or anywhere we talk about, we are all going to SUVs, big vehicles. What is wrong if at all we are in urban systems, if at all we are only traveling few kilometers every day? Why do we need those elephants running around our small roads?
Who drives this aspiration? Who are the drivers of this aspiration? It can't just
think it's community, as you rightly asked. It's community. It's all of us.
Yeah.
And I think that is where we need to really start looking into our aspirations and need to have dialogues on the ground. What are we looking for? I mean, Mr. Suresh also highlighted and air conditioners. I mean, we all need comfort. I don't deny that. We need, human comfort. And Mr. Suresh was talking about built environment or buildings. Professor Khan also deals with it every day. So point is that why are we creating, buildings or even a house fully air conditioned? So these are simple questions and aspirations as community we are trying to bring in. So I think those kind of dialogues need to take place on the ground so that we can really start talking about equality in terms of social, economic, and everybody talks about NIMBY, not in my backyard. Whatever happens through the world, not to me. Like yesterday we were talking about this, and I think Professor Khan highlighted about this pandemic. Professor Sachdev, you also highlighted about this pandemic. That has really brought in stark differences in our community that we have. You were talking about the, hospitals becoming the next, hotels, very plush hotels. I think that's the reality. And we need to really change it in different ways for good, I'm saying, because it's about access. Here also in US, we talk about health system opening up these differences between access to health. People of color, people of low income, they are not getting the same access to health as others are getting. And here we are dealing with the same issues. So point I'm making is it's almost the same issues everywhere. It's just that how we deal with it is an interesting thing. Yes, in previous times, our systems were different. Today, we are different. Our economy is so agile. People are agile. People are learning new things every day. I think why can't we learn this new way of living where we try to balance all these inequalities? So I think it's about perceptions and the way in which we tackle perceptions ourselves, rather than us vying for that big glossy dream. So and I think when we talk about dream things, I would like to just highlight right from now onwards, we should start talking about getting net zero energy, net zero water, net zero waste kind of discussion. So I'm just kickstarting your discussion on dream because I think cities, we need to start talking about that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so my next round was going to be about dreams, your utopian ideas of development, but surely, Vatsal, you raised a point of equity and social hierarchies and race hierarchies and of course those are the very things that make diversity alive. That unless we have this diversity, the cities are going to be dull and boring. And as soon as two people come across the table, there is a notion of inequity and hierarchy, and so. And how do you deal with that in a culturally very, very diverse world and very different world? And so these cultural plays must have been. I'm reminded of we were doing some work in old Gurgaon, and there was a lot of mess, and people were using an area which should have been just in front of an old gateway as a car park. And and of course, as usual, there's no budget, no money can be spent. So all we did was we cleaned the place, we made a rangoli, and we lit lamps. So nobody's going to throw rubbish on a rangoli. You see, so that is a cultural tactic that one can use, and those are the things that that are embedded in societies, that are embedded in mindsets that we need to probably invoke and evoke and get those human sensibilities out, and for a better world. And so my next round is, before I come to the questions, is about how you see a better world. What are the ingredients of a better world? What do we eat in this better world? Where will the food come from? What do we drink, and what are the houses we live in? So if I could go to Mr. Suresh, you first, to throw some light on the economic and social framework, your ideal, your magic wand you've been given to quickly in 5 minutes produce this fantastic social and economic framework in post-pandemic period free of disease, hunger, and poverty. What would it look like?
That's a lot, but I think the larger issue of the food security as a major concern area, I think we should address that very squarely, where the movement of all agrarian products from manufacturing production side, from the farm side, moving towards all the small town, medium town, including the distribution network that we have, is a very important component. As a matter of fact, as a result of that, substantial amount of new changes have started coming in respect of the logistics requirement in terms of cold chain and the storage facilities and distribution area, because producers, agricultural produce are not around the year. You also have to conserve that, and you also require the type of spaces, including the possibility of urban forestry and urban farming. And that's also a new component which is emerging out, especially small and medium towns and neighboring towns which are on the urban sprawl area are also getting into those particular aspect. But I think the most important aspect we have to keep in view is when you do that, we are able to ensure that large number of those particular resources which you think are waste can be utilized in abundance for the requirements of the for the food system and the related inputs that come for that. And that's an important issue that are coming up. It will also be an answer which earlier in the day you asked, earlier in the beginning you said that we can also think in terms of taking a balanced growth between the rural to the urban. We call the word rurban, RURBAN, which will be going towards rural, towards the urban, and you're able to create large number of facilities which are needed from the urban context in terms of basic facilities on roads, water, sanitation, power, education, health service, etc. And also utilize that benefit to ensure the migration does not take place. Number two, the requirements of the production needs for food and various other products which are required. It's not only just food that's involved, you also get dairy products, you require so many other issues which come over there, which are all getting into the urban markets, including the rural markets. You got to therefore create an interface mechanism to also encourage that to happen, and not just put everything in village and the other one coming into urban for as only a consumption movement. There are a large number of value-added products in the agricultural and other farm side, which can be done also into certain urban context. Also, we can work on that. And already good initiatives are already happening. Punjab has already shown a good way. Madhya Pradesh has already shown some very good way in that particular aspects. Gujarat, in terms of the milk cooperatives and all that, have shown excellent example of how they can utilize all those wonderful produce for the larger good of the people. And the demand side is also taking care of the supply is coming from this side. Economic development happens on both sides, in the rural and the marginal side and the urban context, in a good way. And those are excellent initiatives that have already taken place either under the blue revolution of fisheries or white revolution for the milk, or the green revolution for the agricultural side. So each one of those things have done substantial good amount of initiatives for those. But what is needed in the urban context is see how do you position that particular thing pretty close, and what type of inputs we can give in terms of logistics, warehouses, cold chains, and other related component, which has not been addressed till very recently. We don't want the good agricultural producers to go wasted and completely going when bumper production getting wasted. So these type of infrastructure inputs also required to be coming into it in a very large way. And this is a very live topic, discussing getting into the Republic Day, where the farmers want the tractor rally for various things. Even though government has done some good for the agriculture workers, there is some different perceptions coming. We got to get this addressed in a larger way. I think at the end of it is, we all require, when the number of stomachs are increasing from 100 crores to 140 crores, the amount of food inputs that's required for not only grains and vegetables and other related inputs for nourishment is also going to increase. So you also require that particular aspect to be taken care of, increased productivity, increased technology to be used over there, and taking the natural calamities that keep on striking in different parts of the country. How do you deal with resiliency being brought in to see that whatever is produced are not lost, or whatever is built is not lost? We also have to take that into account, and the country are visited by large number of the natural calamities, be it earthquakes or landslides or cyclones or flooding or tsunami or whatever. We have over 280 districts out of 740 districts are multi-disaster prone. So you have to keep this dimension also in view. You asked about socio-economic. That's the last word on I would like to ask. And this is also raised by Sharanya, is also raised by Pooja. How do you deal with inclusive development and equitable development? So there's a general feeling that when you go into urban component, you are getting into problems where the bottom half, the marginalized and disadvantaged, the poor are completely being left out of the thing. And that's where you look at balanced development taking place in a substantial way. I always put this 1, 2, 3, 4 rule, which is more or less proved true all over. If you have 1 on the high income, 2 on the middle income, 3 on the low income, 4 will be the weaker section of low income. That will be 10. Out of those 10, these are the type of population coming. How do you deal with those requirements of all those people in a city or a small town or medium town? If you're able to have the balanced development to give access to resource, be it land as a resource, finance as a resource, infrastructure as a resource, then you'll be able to deal with inclusive and equitable development. One of the cardinal principles of sustainability development is equitable and inclusive development, and I'm sure there's a place for that.
Thank you. And as you know, all of us know that once the urbanization is done, the task is not complete. That the urbanized also suffers from disease, from poverty, from inequity. So it's not. The task is probably begins with providing livelihoods and comfort and health and food and which makes me want to ask Professor Khan, how would the education and practice sector of architecture respond to these challenges in the coming years, and what are the lessons they would certainly have to learn from the current times?
I am still coming to terms with the statistics which Sureshji has just thrown across. I'm trying to come to terms with all of them, but I think it's something which I think you talked of dream, and this is a dream round, as you said.
Yes.
I think not only architects and students of architecture, the practice of architecture, but society in general should. I am dreaming of a society which will question the global system, the global capitalism, which pursues growth at all cost. It causes human exploitation and environmental destruction. We need to question this particular model, and architects, I think, are the most empowered lot to do that, is what I feel. Engineers included, Mr. Suresh included as well, and and
planners as well, yes.
Right. So I'm dreaming at this where we are. When are we going to prioritize social and ecological well-being? And instead of corporate profits and overproduction and excess consumption, we need to really look into it, and we need to have a radical redistribution system. We need to have reduction in the material size of the global economy. How long this is going to continue? We need to question this, and a shift in common value society, wherein we work towards solidarity and autonomy of societies. We need to really look into this, and when we will be able to transform the societies to ensure environmental justice and a good quality of life, within a limited cocoon boundaries, we need to really question these. I am dreaming of a society which questions this, and architects can do that, thinkers can do that, and strive for a self-determined life in dignity for all. That's my dream, that the society will have dignity for all, welfare for all, and time and conviviality for all. And this is what is needed for the society of the future, and the economy and a society that sustains the natural basis of life. And natural basis of life we have all forgotten, and we need to have this reinstated in our thought processes. And reduction of production and consumption, especially in the so-called global north, coming from global south. I'm saying this, an overall reduction in the production and consumption is absolutely necessary, and we need to blast the Western paradigms of development, and we need to relook at a sustained traditional format and a module of development for our country. The more democratic decision-making process in my society is what I'm looking at, and changes which are oriented towards sufficiency, and that's a very important word, sufficiency, instead of purely technological changes and improvements in efficiency. This will solve a lot of ecological issues and problems, and we believe, and I believe that historically it has been proven that decoupling of the economic growth from resource use is not possible, and we have done that, and that is the issue which is plaguing our Vatsal, thank you so much with agreeing with me. But I mean, this is the ideal dream of a society that I'm imagining. An architectural curriculum, architectural thought process has to imbibe all this. Rather than being rather than concentrating on what should be, how green should our buildings be, how green our developments be. This is a larger framework in which I am imagining and dreaming that the architectural curriculum will involve and incorporate all of this.
Excellent. I think you bring about you mentioned such important points that we forget when we use our tools for measuring growth and economic success. Simple points like human dignity is so important, and how to kind of nurture trust between human beings, the systems. There is such a breakdown of trust between the politicians and society at large and various professional groups, and the climate therefore becomes suspicious, and that is because of loss of human dignity as well, and how to kind of bring that and nurture that is so important. That comes to the point of how to nurture communities. So Dr. Bhatt, what to your mind are the keeping your dream cap on, what to your mind are the ways in which the communities might change in your dream world, and what is the behavior you expect from them, or you would think they would become different from who they are now?
So I think, as Professor Khan highlighted, I will just sum it up in 2 words: equity for all, in all these aspects that you just highlighted. And I said a few minutes ago, and I still stick by that, net zero or net positive, whatever we call it. And our previous communities in ancient times, they were net zero and or net positive, whatever we call it. And I think, Professor Khan, you also highlighted earlier concepts about urban planning and all petri and other things. And I see that the urban-rural mix that Mr. Suresh was talking about, I think we have existing examples of communities that are still practicing those olden days, like Auroville, where Mr. Suresh is nearby, at least near Chennai. And I think point here is that we need to look into those kind of concepts and see what they teach us. We might not be able to take exactly the same thing everywhere across India, but I think learn from these kind of practices and understand what we can do. Mr. Suresh was talking about urban reforestation, urban agriculture and all. I think these are all concepts of us trying to bring all these aspects. We all, I nowadays see a lot of new progress in which we all are talking about our wellness. Even in India, I see at 5 a.m. people getting up for running, bicycling, and so many other things. So I think keeping all these ideas together as a community, let's try to talk about holistic development. And we need all strata of life, all strata of economic development in our cities. So I think, why don't we really try to develop a community that is cohesive? In ancient times also, we had those kind of communities existing. Like Suruchi is mentioning here in a chat, that I think, how do we really tackle these inequalities, and what pandemic taught us? So I think, as I highlighted a few minutes ago, pandemic has opened up all these different issues that we are talking about, potentially might take place with climate change or many other calamities. So I think all of us talked about what pandemic has affected in last 1 hour, but I think pandemic has really opened up all these different facets and how impacts can take place on our day-to-day lives, societies, inequalities and all. So I think learning from this, we don't need more lessons. Let's learn from it. Let's think about going net zero, net positive for 2050 kind of target. We have 30 more years, and we can talk about natural resource consumption patterns as well as equality issues. And I think we all talk about NIMBY in our urban planning architecture field. I think we need to tackle it head on. Unless and until we tackle it head on and bring all the people from different communities on board, I mean, we should not consider ourselves only as thinkers, because as Satya was asking, how can we bring community on board? So I think keeping that element alive all the times, let's bring community on board, community on board, community on board. I think that is a key way for us to learn from their perspectives. We can't be in our utopian castles and keep on talking about what can be the development and how we can tackle this urban rural divide and all those things. We need to bring all aspects, all strata of our community on board to talk about it, whether we talk about a small community, a city, or our larger urban development national issues in this discussion. We might have our thoughts, but if at all we bring community thoughts on this, I think we can really learn a lot what they are looking for. And probably we might be able to come to a balance in some ways. I mean, nowadays, I always seen that in urban areas, we talk about slum redevelopment, and basically it's again shifting them outside of our urban areas. What is the point? Let's take each and every human being in our community as equal and part of the society, because without them, we can't live. We have known about the secondary and tertiary economic development sectors. We can't live without them. And that is bringing efficiency in our system. So why are we trying to do away with this efficiency and trying to separate me versus you and so on and so forth? So bringing community back to the table would be a great way for us to start talking about future of going net zero, net positive with equality for all.
So, I mean, that is, very important, of course, but that would also require shedding our biases that come into play when we deal with other human beings. Also, of course, in the past, we've always lived in a safe bubble of blood relations in larger communities, but now a community comprises of people from all walks of life, all sorts of backgrounds, and we need to kind of rethink how we evaluate other human beings, because that is a natural thing to do, isn't it? You meet somebody, you'll ask, what is your name, what is your caste, where are you from, and quickly you calculate, your judgment. And so we need to kind of reassess how that encounter happens. And I think, as you rightly said, your starting point is humanity, dignity, mutual trust, mutual respect. I mean, those are basic values that need to be put into play before we kind of judge each other or cast judgment. So, is there any question you would like to ask each other while I go through the questions? I think Suruchi's question on traditional system has already been addressed. Vatsal, you want to ask?
So again, let me put myself as an outsider, still an insider. So I am still an Indian citizen, Indian at heart. So I always straddle with this thought process. And as I said, working with India and China on behalf of US government for last 15 years, I always straddle. We talk about, ditching China good and all. Why? I mean, Mr. Suresh was talking about a few minutes ago, our urban sector is providing 75% of economic growth and all. So that is the solution. Point is, this Make in India and all is good. Actually, how much we are doing is a question. And if at all we want to provide that solution, why don't we bring the community on board to figure out how we can really start at least fulfilling our own consumption. Simple. Let's not talk about anything else. Let's not talk about exports. Let's think about how can we fulfill our own consumption. This 75% national GDP comes from urban areas. Let's see how we can fulfill that with
So
our
that-
own development, with our own production, so that we are not asking other countries every day, oh, give me some money, give me some technology. Why?
That is a very strong agenda of the Atmanirbhar, agenda of the government as well, that, you make, and what Professor Khan also mentioned, sufficiency of everything. And but what gets invariably left out of this, even this is, simple livelihoods. People who make craftsmen, for example, have suffered during the pandemic a lot. They've not had a place to sell their produce, because of mobility. So how do you make if if there's no market for, say, hand woven or hand thing, then how do you make that into mainstream? And so those are, I guess those are areas where which will require focused boost or support. It is not just a matter of everybody deciding to be Atmanirbhar. You have to kind of support certain sectors, make them stand on their feet before we expect them to run. Would the other two want to elaborate on this, on livelihoods, on self-sufficiency?
I think what Professor, want to take first? Go ahead.
Please.
You go
After you.
ahead first, sir. You go ahead. I'll take later.
All right. I've already talked about this, and I've already discussed this, that unless we have smaller modules of growth, smaller economic modules of communities, this problem will persist. And another pandemic, another lockdown, few more lockdowns will further highlight this and escalate this. So we need to actually look into what is. I mean, you're talking of workmen, craftsmen, not able to travel, restricted mobility, so they are not able to sell their goods to a larger community, and so on. So I am saying, question the basic model of this trade-in system. Why can we not have localized, cocooned communities? Is what my point is. This will address the problem to a larger extent.
Yeah, I think building upon what has been told by both by Vatsal as well as by Professor Habib Khan sir, I think one of the major area when you talk in terms of the larger issues of livelihood support, I think what we need to address is the large percentage of informal sector jobs. Urbanization brings along with that wealth creation of very large nature. But you'll be very surprised to know of that only around 35% of the people get employment in the formal sector. Somebody with a regular monthly salary working in establishments, either government or private or enterprises or whatever. But most of the other cases which contribute very richly are in the informal sector and with large number of trades and activities which contribute well. So therefore, what we need to do if you want to have the support to be given for this sector is the right attitude which government has taken, where urbanization also brings issues of urban poverty alleviation, or the livelihood support program is an important program. Is the other side of the coin which you have to deal with. While physical infrastructure, housing, roads, water, sanitation, these can all come, the social aspects of employment generation and support for them for livelihood support becomes very, very important. And that's a national urban livelihood mission. I'm sure most of you must be already aware, has already made a very good success in the context, along with the other physical development component, wherein we are talking in terms of the grouping of communities like the Kudumbashree units in Kerala or various other groups that you have in Lucknow for the textile side, or also the Seva initiatives taking place in Gujarat, etc. But more importantly, the idea is to give the right level of skill sets for them. Now, therefore, the new education policy as well as the skill development policy are all addressed towards that. Not to deal with a graduate or of either commerce or arts or science, etc., or even a +2. How do you deal with them right at a younger level and ask them to train them on to vocational training, which can give the right level of jobs for them, and at the same time literacy already gone through till they're about 8th standard. Then beyond that particular thing, get into vocational stream in a large way of large number of trades. So therefore the 41 skill development councils which are there are dealing with those particular sector for the livelihood support program, along with other initiatives that you can deal with SMSC, small and medium sector enterprises, as well as activities which can be done on the construction sector, textile sector, handicraft sector, various other floriculture sector, even in agriculture related area. Those are areas which you require. If you're able to concentrate and put lot of action to deal with the poverty alleviation and the livelihood support program, both in the rural and urban areas, concentrated exclusively on that, give them the right level of infrastructure for that, give the right level of skill sets required to deal with that, give the type of small financial support needed to deal with those particular things, and encouragement in the markets to deal with the products. To a large extent, the livelihood support program will be very successful. And you should be very happy and proud that India's urban agenda also has two sides to the coin. Till recently, name of the ministry itself was Urban Development and Poverty Alleviation. And poverty alleviation through the livelihood mission is an important comment. It's only now it's been changed again for housing and urban affairs. Otherwise, even now the NULM and the RULM, Rural Urban Livelihood Mission, and the National Urban Livelihood Mission becomes very, very important. I'm sure, Vibhuti, you will get fantastic insights into that with some very good practices and good impact. Take my word, India's poverty level or below people living below the poverty line, you are the last, leave out what was there for the last 30 years, last 5 to 6 years time period, the number of people below the poverty line has come down substantially low because of the initiatives taken under both the NULM and the RULM through the livelihood support initiatives for the bottom of the pyramid, namely the weaker sections, rural and urban, disadvantaged, marginalized, other sector who might be either illiterate or semi-literate, and then getting into those particular vocations which can give them the right level of employment for that. I'm glad you raised this issue under the overall topic of urban green. Nothing can be sustainable even if you have all the wonderful green forests and gardens being created if you do not have the right level of livelihood support for more than around 40 to 50% of India's population. So I think you have touched it rightly. And what is required is the answer lies in what Habibji said, localize that into small little groups of neighborhood groups which can come over there. The textile sectors are shown, handloom sector has shown this particular thing, the handicraft sector has shown this particular aspects in beekeeping, other poultry, other aspects. We have seen good examples of each one of them. Construction sector is also another area which is our own area of work. We need to work in this particular sector, and therefore the migrant workers become an important part. Maybe one takeaway for your particular discussion today is going to be, what do we do with the migrant workers who are coming from the rural to the urban area and helping the urban economic activity take place, and do a lot of work over there, even though they may not be skilled or trained or certified, even that is required. You can see how you can deal with the needs of the migrant worker. In that context, I salute the initiative for the rental housing scheme, which has just been launched. You can't have ownership component coming, they keep on coming and going. So for the first time, a national urban rental housing scheme initiative to be done to deal with the bottom half of the pyramid is a very good initiative towards that. That's one aspect. As you rightly said, health, education, skill, etc., would become equally important to deal with the all-round development of the class. Okay?
Okay, great. Those were to kind of, I think we can wrap it up on this positive note of a lot of good initiatives to come. And I think there is a lot to celebrate about where we are. There is, more people have more access to education, health, food. More people are, within they have more access to livelihood. Yet, there is a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of inequity, and there are also, I don't fully agree with calling them migrants even, so there are things we can debate, and nevertheless, there is a very, very useful lot of takeaways from this discussion, and which can further open discussion as well. So I thank again my eminent panelists, Mr. V. Suresh, Professor Habib Khan, Dr. Vatsal Bhatt. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts and points so generously and openly. And I think that was a great session, and there's a lot of food for thought there. And I also thank my home team, Tanya Verma, Komal, Dr. Kanupriya, and entire university, the IT, who made this possible, and without a technical glitch, which is great. Thank you all. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you. We enjoyed it as much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Pleasure.